Well, Kim, for me, when I started reading the book, I wanted to just dive in and just, if you could take yourself back to the moment you decided that the Air Force Academy was where you wanted to be.
Yeah, it's going to go back a little bit because for me, that was in fifth grade. I think it was about 10 years old. This was 1986. So there, I've just dated myself completely. But it actually happened because of the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger. And I think many people, at least in our generation, probably remember where they were. Or at least recall the moment of hearing about the Space Shuttle Challenger, because for me, it was this excitement, this thrill of the launch, and then really devastation after it ended in a terrible tragedy. But I think something in that moment, it just connected with me in some way, which I know is a little bit strange. I mean, this idea of going, you know, to be in space, but knowing that it's something so important to you that you're willing to give your life for it. And I don't know,
Yeah.
there's just something for me. I still struggle today to even really make sense of it all, but I realize that the astronauts died doing something that they believed in that was bigger and more important than themselves. And that just resonated with me, even at 10 years old. And so I decided after watching that and having some conversations with my parents that I wanted to be an astronaut someday. And the way to get there, and my idea for that path, was to go to the Air Force Academy and become a fighter pilot.
And it's amazing that it could be in a sheer moment because, in the book, you talk about beauty pageants were, were the thing prior to that. And all of
Yeah.
a sudden you had this realization that there's something bigger out there.
Yeah. My parents always told me it was like I just flipped the switch, where I wasn't all that interested in school. I was just kind of, I don't know, along for the ride and trying different things, but not really sure of what I wanted. And they said it was like I flipped a switch. I made that decision, and they never had to ask me about doing homework again. It was just like automatically for me that I had this drive, this desire, this big goal that I knew I had to work hard if I wanted to get after it and achieve it.
Yeah. And I heard that your dad, he had moments, where he wasn't sure that you were ready.
Yeah.
And there is one incident, and I'd have to flip through my tabs here. There was one incident that he suddenly like, she's serious,
Yeah.
and I need to help her work on this. Can you share with us a little bit about that one?
Yeah. So my dad is a graduate of the Air Force Academy, and I think he was a little hesitant about like his little girl going to the Air Force. And I think part of this is when he was there were no women. And I think it was just hard for him to realize, like, did I really have what it takes? Was I tough enough? Was I willing to commit everything I had? And then I think this was maybe my junior year of high school. And I was running cross country. I was a cross country runner. And this was I think our league finals. And at the start of the race with cross country, everybody's kind of jammed in. You're all vying for a spot out front and, waiting for the gun to sound for you to take off and run. And that launch went, and we all packed as fast as we could to try to get out in front. And somebody stepped on the back of my shoe and it came off. There was this half second of hesitation of like, do I stop? I mean, there's this pack of runners. Do I stop and get my shoe? I couldn't even see it. So I was trying to figure out how I would even do this. I'd have to take the time. This is all happening a matter of like a second here. And then I was like, well, I'll just keep running because I didn't want it to hold me back. I didn't want to lose. And so I thought, well, how bad could it be? I'll just keep running. So I decided to run the entire cross country race without the shoe, which may or may not have been the best decision because it was by the time I finished the race, which I did finish, I would not say that I won in any category, but I finished the race and ended up with a pretty bloody and blistered foot as a result of it. But my mom was there watching the race, and she happened to call my dad afterwards and was like, "You are not going to believe what your daughter just did." And she relayed the story to my dad. And I think it was that moment where my dad was like, I guess she is tough enough. So there was some goodness that came out of that, other than getting crutches and hobbling around for a couple weeks on a pretty damaged foot, but it was worth it.
Yeah, because that takes perseverance right then and there, and to know that it's like, okay, I'm not going to let anything hold me back, and
Yeah.
it's very inspiring. And you mentioned that there wasn't female fighter pilots, And how does it feel to know that today you are a role model that women are looking up to defy the odds in leadership and in different roles?
I'll tell you what, I don't know that I embraced that role initially. I think for me, it was just about survival and getting through. And, there had been a few women that had come before me, but I was the only woman in my fighter squadrons for a very long time. And I just wanted to be a fighter pilot. I didn't want to be this female fighter pilot. I just wanted to be known
Right.
as a good pilot that did a good job. But over time, I think it was pointed out to me. I didn't come to this on my own, but it was pointed out to me that I could make a difference. I could make an impact for young girls and young women and women, just to see that somebody else can do it. That, not just be a leader and a fighter pilot, but now I also have a family. I'm a mom and a wife. So I could do these things. It
Right.
wasn't always easy, but I could do these things and I could be an example for others.
You
So
know,
it's taken me time to embrace that role, though.
yeah. And, and as a mom, especially, people are like, wow, like she can still have what her dream was and still have a family and lead in that way because it's a total different leadership. Your kids end up socializing you as well.
Yes.
And
Yeah. It is not easy. But I think any career path you take when you're trying to do multiple things at once, it's hard. And having somebody to talk to, I mean, I love mentoring young girls and women, just to share my experience. I think about all the people that have shared their experiences and their stories with me and what an impact it has made on my life. And so even though I didn't embrace it initially, I very much feel a responsibility now.
and again, like, one of the things that you mentioned in the book, there's no singular recipe to success. And something I wanted to read here is when we take action in critical moments, when we persevere despite the difficulty, then we're positioned to create a culture of courage and an environment of trust that builds deeper relationships, inspires loyalty, and enables our teams to perform at their best. And that's just in the prologue. And I was just like, okay, I'm diving right in. And one of the really big things that stood out, and again, this is again from the prologue that I want to share with everybody, Kim, that you talk about revealing the human side of leadership, about holding ourselves accountable, having those difficult conversations, and making decisions even when we don't have enough perfect information. And one of the things that I know probably in the past few years, but for everyone at any point in time, there's always this level of uncertainty. And I would love for you to just share with us a little bit of how you've dealt with uncertainty in, and having the human side of leadership, because I don't think we talk about it enough.
Yeah, and it's not something that it's not something I started with. It's something that I learned over time, was just, this idea of people really just want to see you for who you are. I think if there was something good that came out of the pandemic and operating from home, was this idea of sharing a little bit more about us and who we are as people and human beings, and parents and spouses and, pets coming in the room. Like, it just made us human. It made us relatable. For me, I think I had this idea initially that as a leader, I had to put on this tough exterior, that I was a combat proven fighter pilot. This is what it was about. I had to set the example. And it turns out that's really not what my team wanted. That's not where they connected with me. And it took my 3-year-old son to teach me this lesson, because prior to taking command of my very first squadron, so this is about 150 people, a change of command ceremony happens. It's a big formal event. There's people come in from around like the local area. My friends and family had flown in, just a very big formal event. And my husband and my son were there in the front row. And about, I don't know, 10 to 15 minutes in the ceremony, I look down at my son and I can tell he is just totally bored out of his mind. Like, he is just wants no part of this anymore. So I give him, that little smile, trying to encourage him. And he looks at me, smiles back, and then he stands up. And I'm kind of wondering, like, what are you doing? And he takes a couple steps towards me. And I'm starting to get this feeling of like nervousness coming on, like, this is not part of the script, right? This is not part of this very formal ceremony.
Right.
And my boss, my new soon to be boss, is giving a very, important speech about leadership and leading a team. And I am not paying attention to him at this point because I'm looking at my son now, who is now taking these small steps toward the stage. Yeah. So my husband and I are now doing this, like what I call this silent communication thing, where I'm looking at him thinking like, you should do something. And he's looking back at me thinking, I'm not doing anything, because we could have like a meltdown right here in front of everyone. My son is oblivious to all of this because he continues to take steps towards the stage and eventually walks up right on stage and sits in my lap in the middle of this big formal ceremony where I'm in uniform. There's an airplane behind me, just very big formal event. And my son is sitting in my lap. There is part of me that is just terrified of like what my team is thinking about me, that, here I am supposed to be this leader of 150 people and I can't control my 3-year-old son. What I realized in that moment was how important it was, as I'm looking at my son in my lap, who's just content as can be. It's this idea that it's important for my team to see me for who I am, right? I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a fighter pilot, I'm a leader, I'm all of these things. And that's okay, right? That is
Yeah.
that human side of leadership. I was still really worried about what my team was thinking, but the next few days, it was like the highlight of the ceremony. Everybody was talking about it. And what I realized, it connected me with them in a way that I never could have done myself. And it took my 3-year-old to teach me that lesson.
Wow. Because it could have really backfired.
Yeah,
Not thinking about that meltdown.
well, yeah. And that probably wouldn't have, maybe has been as nice of a story, but, this idea that, you can still be this strong leader and have this compassionate side as well. And I think that's what makes good leaders. You can be tough, but you also can be kind, right? You can deliver bad news and do it in a very kind and compassionate way. I
Right.
think that's all part of this human side of leadership.
Tell us a little bit about your analogy with the headwinds and how it translates to the challenges we face.
Yeah, I think we all face different challenges in our lives, and I think about it, for me, it's sometimes helpful to do it in aviation terms and how I can adjust and react. Headwinds, when you're in an airplane, if you think about flying, from one end of a country to another, whichever one it may be, if you have headwinds, it is going to take you longer to get there, right? And it potentially could delay you. Um, you may even have to stop and get more fuel if the headwinds are that bad. But in an airplane, to take off, the only way you can take off is into the wind. It gives you lift. It gives you, and the ability to take off and launch. And so that's what I kind of look at sometimes, these headwinds that I have faced in life, challenges, failures, mistakes, you name it. Yes, they can slow me down. They can be frustrating, but they also give me lift, because every hard thing that I've done, when I look back, has made me better at doing hard things. It has made me stronger on the other side. So I try to remember that, sometimes those things really feel hard. They feel frustrating. They can feel even devastating. It's all about what we do with them that really matters.
And one of the things that you also talk about a lot in the book, or there's a chapter actually, is about that preparation for those hard things.
Yeah.
And planning for the contingencies and an integral part of your training before you even get in the plane.
Yeah.
So I'd love, one of the things that you also talk about, chair flying and visualization. How important is visualizing your goal or visualizing what you're needing to do play a part in not only flying the plane, but how it can be translated also into leadership?
Yeah. I think it's everything. For me, like, the only way I feel like I have survived my life, my career, has been through preparation and putting in the work in advance. Because when we prepare, when we put in the work, when we do the research, when we sit down and think through something by visualizing, um, it's like a freebie, right? We get a chance to think through a situation that is likely causing us stress in some way. We can think about it, we can visualize it, we can think about a positive outcome and visualize the positive outcome and think about how we get there. the thing for me that really made the difference was I also thought about the negatives, like what could happen, what could go
Mm,
wrong. I never, uh, like I wouldn't wallow in that or stay there, but I want to think about, okay, let me just think about a little bit of the worst case scenario. What could happen in that situation? And then the most important piece is like, what would I do in that moment? How would I react? How would I respond?
right.
And then I would let it go. Then I would just focus on that positive outcome. For me, that process of preparation, practice, and for me, this visualization was what we call chair flying, which is just a pilot preparation technique for preparing for a mission where you sit in a chair and you might even have the cockpit taped to a wall, which we did in many cases. Today, they use virtual reality. But
Yeah.
for me, it was just visualizing this mission, talking through radio calls, thinking through the scenario, really just visualizing the mission in advance. And by doing that, I found those areas where like it wasn't where I wasn't great, right? Where I needed a little bit more research, I needed a little bit more work. And then I also just, it gave me a sense of peace, really, of like, I've got this. I know this. I know my stuff and I can do it. And the stuff that I didn't know, I went back and read and researched and then did it all over again. I think that's what helped me be successful. That is what gave me a sense of confidence because I became more competent by doing that.